Well, but today, how would you like to wake up one morning and make a decision to just quit your life as you know it and go do an adventure? Well, that's what we're going to hear about today. This adventuresome, he calls himself Old Solo Sailor, which is a terrific designation. I cannot imagine the guts to just upend your life and go live your dream. And I'm looking forward to having him share what his dream manifests. David White.
This thing working? Yeah, great. Now we'll try the slides. Everybody's got a bunch of moments in your life when something can go one way or the other. I was on a business flight from San Francisco to Anchorage, Alaska, and this was in the old days when they had stewardesses and your bags were checked and you had hats and pillows in the overhead and they handed out magazines. And they gave me that one. Now, just for reference, this was one of the finest cars they were advertising at the time. And 70 some odd pages into the magazine, I see this picture. Now, I'd never sailed. Boy Scout camp doesn't count, and aircraft carriers don't count. So this caught my eye, and for some reason, this in the article was entitled Cruising the Good Life Afloat. And I decided this was a good idea. So I found a friend of mine who had a Cal 20, and we went sailing on San Francisco Bay a couple of times. And I ordered one of these boats. It's called a West Sail 32. This was one of the greatest marketing things they'd ever done because they had orders for years. But if you paid them enough money, they slipped you in a little bit earlier. It still took 9 months for my boat to arrive. I kept working, but I sold my house, moved into an apartment, and when the boat came, I was so nervous. I really didn't know anything about this. I drove to the boatyard when they were unloading it, and I looked at it coming off the trailer, and I drove away and came back when it was all put together. I just didn't know anything. But I had to learn quickly because I had to move it from the slip where they put it in the water into the marina where I had to be. And there was an old sailor there who took me under his wing, God love him, got on the boat with me and took me out in the calm water in the marina and showed me what forward and reverse and what happens to the boat and how it moves and this, that, and the other thing. And slowly I started playing with the boat, going out sailing, getting friends to go with me. And 6 months later, we decided, three of us actually decided we were going to take off and go sailing to the South Pacific. So we bought all the charts, and there's a lot of charts that you have to have. This was way prior to GPS days, so you had to have charts for everything. And we were charted down through Mexico to the Galapagos if we were lucky enough to be able to go there, and then on to the South Pacific, Marquesas, Tahiti, Australia, New Zealand, all of that. I think we stopped buying charts for us in Australia because you start getting a real pile of them. And that's some of the food we had to load on board to go. And in 1974, we sailed out from San Francisco Bay, naive and dauntless, and headed south. Stopped in Mexico, stopped in Los Angeles and San Diego on the way just to find out we could get there. And then sailed from San Diego to Cabo San Lucas, out of sight of land. We had to learn to navigate. Because if you're going to sail across an ocean, you have to be able to find where you're going. It's pretty easy to find Mexico when you're going south, you just turn left. But when you're headed from Mexico 4,000 miles due west, you pretty much got to know what you're doing. And we didn't know how to use celestial navigation. So we taught ourselves celestial navigation on the trip down to Cabo San Lucas. At the time, Cabo San Lucas was just a little teeny, it wasn't anything because big cruise ships couldn't get in there. They didn't have the highway done. The airport wasn't doing anything. It was pretty small. We stayed in Cabo San Lucas for a little while, went up to La Paz, sailed over to the other coast and sailed all the way down to Acapulco. That was the boat. A friend of mine took that when we were off Los Angeles on our way south. Looks pretty nice, weather's nice, everything's hunky-dory. Cabo San Lucas, the Sea of Cortez, there's a lot of fish. That's a pretty good sized mahi or dorado or whatever you want to call it. And that was a wahoo, and that was one of the best fish I ever had. We sailed from Acapulco to Acapulco all the way to Nuka Hiva and the Marquesas. It's about 4,200 nautical miles. And you're going from northern latitudes to southern latitudes. And you got to find Nuka Hiva, which is a little teeny, it was pretty primitive back then. Now they've got an airport and tourism has taken off. This picture was taken by the guy who met us there. There was only one sailboat in the harbor when we got to Nuka Hiva and the Marquesas. And the guy, we were putting down the anchor, and this man is rowing over and brings us a cold bottle of beer and a warm loaf of bread. Now, we've been at sea for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and nothing but time on our hands, and here we had a beer immediately. This picture was taken, that island back there behind us is Nuka Hiva, and we were out on a photo shoot with Ian Kiernan, who was the guy who met us. Ian's name pops up again because all of these crazy sailors end up doing the same silly stuff. From the Marquesas, we sailed around the Marquesas. There are a bunch of islands there, pretty empty islands. There's an island there that has black volcanic sand beaches. And we were the only two people putting footprints on it that day. There were people living on the island, but they weren't on the beaches. It's pretty impressive. We sailed back to Nuka Hiva before we left for Tahiti, and that was the big mistake. Another one of those little moments that changes the whole route of a life. The dinghy floated away at night. This was the only way to get on and offshore. That was the one you saw me with the fish a couple of minutes ago. It was pretty small, but it worked. We could get 2 or 3 people in it. It floated off. Who left it tied badly? We're not going to get into that because it doesn't make any difference. We now had no dinghy. We sailed straight to Tahiti and pulled into the dock at Tahiti and stayed there for quite a while, had some fun. And without a dinghy, and we couldn't buy one there, remember, this is mid-70s, so we would have had air freight a dinghy down from probably Europe, probably French, at a huge expense to get us something that we could continue on island hopping in the South Pacific. So my friend Dennis decides he wants to keep going and I want to go home. So he gets on a big cruiser that was there, a sailboat, ended up sailing all the way around to Miami. And I decided, okay, I'm going to go back to San Francisco by myself. Now this is another 4,700 mile trip, and nobody knew I was going. I didn't let anybody know, and I just took off. Going north to San Francisco, again, celestial navigation all the way, and you don't see anything until the fog outside of California. That's a little bit down the line. When I got to San Francisco, they were pretty surprised that one person sailed into San Francisco alone from Tahiti. It caught the Coast Guard off guard when they get you on the radio and say, how many souls on board and where are you coming from? There's one person on board and coming from Tahiti. This doesn't happen in San Francisco. People check in somewhere earlier. I decided to try and sell the boat and get a little bit larger one and go back and keep going. That wasn't working, and I found out that there was a race that they were running single-handed, which now I figured I could do, single-handed from San Francisco to Japan. 1975, it was for Ocean Expo in 75. So I entered that race, and at the same time, I was entered into the Observer single-handed transatlantic race the following year, which goes from Plymouth, England to Newport, Rhode Island. So I got the little boat ready for the trip to Japan, and 2 days before I left, a friend of mine, gives me this kitten. This cat turned to be a lot of fun in the ongoing trip. There I was at the San Francisco Yacht Club, same boat, with another dinghy, because it was easy to get those in San Francisco and not so easy in Tahiti. The boat behind me is a German. There were 8 boats in the race. Wasn't very well subscribed. The Japanese had set it up. And there were a lot of people that didn't know about it, but I thought it'd be fun. You had to go, the first race they'd run from San Francisco to Japan, they left the rules open, and a Frenchman by the name of Eric Taberley, who's very famous, decided to go north and got there about 3 weeks before anybody else because he was going Great Circle. It's uncomfortable, but it's thousands of miles. That's why the airplanes that fly from San Francisco to Tokyo end up going over Russia, because that's the Great Circle route. So he sailed north and got there very quickly, so the Japanese decided to level out the race. They made Oahu as a point of the race. You had to pass Oahu to starboard. So we sailed out of San Francisco. There's the Bay Bridge underneath me, or over me. Sailed out of San Francisco and headed to Japan. Now, it was kind of hard to go past Hawaii, I can tell you. You've been at sea for 3 weeks, and there's Waikiki Beach right off maybe 2 miles away, and you've got 4,000 miles of ocean ahead of you. Boy, it's tempting to go in for a beer, but that didn't work. I kept going, got to Okinawa, which is where the finish line was, only you had to sail around the southern tip of Okinawa, and the finish line was all the way north on the island. And I had been awake for probably a day before we got to Okinawa, and then all the way up the backside of the island where there's a lot of traffic. And I got myself overtired, and son of a gun if I didn't run aground. There's the dumb cat climbing out of the rigging. Now that's kind of discouraging. But they took me off the boat. We tied it down so it wouldn't go any further. They took me off and got a good night's sleep, and the next morning we went back, hooked some lines on it, waited for the tide, and that sturdy little boat, which everybody laughs at because it's slow, came right off the rocks, and I was able to sail it into the harbor, and they let me finish the race. I'd lost a couple of positions while I was sitting on the ground. And there the Japanese, for some reason, were really entranced with the fact that I had this silly cat with me. And they wanted the cat. You can see that's back when I was small-boned. So, we got to fix the boat. Hauled it out of the water, and the damage wasn't really that bad. Chewed up a lot of the fiberglass along one corner, but it wasn't terrible. And some of the guys, the sailors there, were just wonderful. These are not rich guys. These are garage builder, boat builders. And they came and helped me get this thing, because I was not fiberglass savvy. I could sail all right by now, but I didn't know fiberglass very well. So these guys helped me, and we got the boat patched. We were all living pretty rough, living on the boats. So I found out about Japanese community baths, because that's how we were cleaning ourselves. and discovered sushi, which is back again, 1975. That's a long time ago. This is some of the crowd that helped me. The guy next to me, who was also in the race, his name Yuko Tada. He ended up racing in the round the world race later. A lot of guys from the race did. I now had to get my boat from Japan to England because the race across the Atlantic was starting the next spring. And the West Sail Company, who made the boat, I was now becoming kind of famous in the West Sail circles. The West Sail people sponsored me enough to get my boat loaded on a freighter and taken to Southampton, England. So I flew home for a while. We put the boat on a freighter, and I flew home for a while. I did the observer race. While I was in England at Southampton, I met Robin Knox Johnson. Now, any of you who are sailors, but probably most of you don't know, he's now Sir Robin Knox Johnson, and he was the first man to sail around the world by himself, nonstop. And because the boat he sailed was basically a West Sail. It's a Colin Archer design, double-ender, 32 feet long. So the West Sail people had contracted with Robin to help me get my boat ready for the O-Star, which is Observer Single-Handed Transatlantic Race. I've jumped ahead a little bit, I'm sorry. We put the boat together in Southampton, sailed it down to Plymouth, England, and I took off with over 100 boats in the Observer Single-Handed Race in 1976. This turned out to be a weather event that a lot of people, I didn't seem to get a problem out of it, but 40 boats didn't finish. One was lost. It was supposedly pretty rough, but without communications, except for VHF radio, you don't know what's going on. So I was blind and just sailing across the Atlantic. I think I was 35th boat in. It was terrible because I got to Newport and floated around in the calm for 2.5 days. I could see the finish line and I couldn't get there, which just drives you nuts. My parents had flown out from Denver to see me finish, and they're stuck at the hotel. And what a nuisance. Anyway, I worked for West Sail and did some promotional stuff for them. And during that time, I was down in Fort Lauderdale, sold the first boat, and from West Sail I bought a kit because they would offer the same boat in a kit form. And what I bought was a hull with a deck with the ballast inside and the rudder on it, and there it is. Same name. The name Katafa means nothing to anybody who hasn't read the book, and the book was my first 2,000 years, and it was written 100 years ago. But so I'm never going to have anybody else that has that name on a boat. So I had to now build this, but fortunately, we put it in a boatyard that was about 4 miles away from the factory, and the factory was on 4-day work schedule. So I just hired all the guys to come help me build the boat, and they'd sneak stuff out, and they'd do the machining of the woodwork that had to be done, and this, that, and the other thing. And we just set up a shop on the side of the beach and put this boat together in a pretty short period of time. And it turned out pretty nicely. Now, I've got this boat, second boat, and I sail up to Newport, Rhode Island, to do another silly race called the Bermuda 1-2. And this is a single-handed race from Newport to Bermuda and a double-handed race back from Bermuda to Newport. And it's a short enough race that it can be done basically in a week. So somebody who just wants to do this for fun and come back with their wife in a or whatever as crew, it's an easy, fun race. It takes less than a week to normally sail to Bermuda from Newport. And I did the Bermuda 1-2, And at the end of the one, we're at the St. George's Dinghy and Sport Club in St. George's, Bermuda, drinking beer, as sailors will do at the end of one of these things, and we started talking about a race around the world. Well, in the sail back, it stuck in my mind that maybe this is something we ought to do. It was going to happen sometime. We were now racing single-handed across the Atlantic, across the Pacific. From France, they were racing down to the islands, the Caribbean. So the next thing that was going to happen was they were going to run a race around the world, single-handed. I decided we ought to run it from the United States. When I got back to Newport, I called Robin Knox Johnson in England and asked him. I said, well, you've already done it. You think we ought to run a race around the world? And he says, better you than me, bud. And he was out, supposedly. I kept at it. And with the help of the Rhode Island State Yachting Commission and Goat Island, which if anybody's been up to Newport, you know where Goat Island is. It's just basically part of Newport. There's a big hotel there. We got some backing from the Rhode Island State Yachting Committee, small backing, and some friends of mine who had some money contributed enough and a typewriter, and I wrote the rules for the round the loan and coined the name, which I didn't register, and that was stupid, of course, but you don't think about these things. This was we didn't even have a start date. That's why it says fall of 1982. We were trying to generate a start date. The rules were sent out in the fall of 80, and we started getting people interested. The entry fee was $400. Now that wouldn't have covered anything as far as running the race, but we weren't sure if anybody'd even show up. Getting help from Newport was really difficult. People thought we were nuts. Really. The Rhode Island State Yachting Committee, he was a friend who was in charge of that. He was a dentist in Rhode Island, and he was sympathetic to the cause. But the two yacht clubs in Newport didn't want anything to do with this crazy stunt, people going out trying to kill themselves sailing around the world. But something like 400 people requested information. 25 or 30 sent in applications and money, and where's that picture of the start line? It's not there. It was a go that this thing was going to happen. I stopped fooling around with the rules and everything because that was basically done, and I decided, well, I'm going to need a bigger boat. So I sold the second Codifa and hired a designer, Alan Gurney, who's a famous yacht designer, who lived in New York. My friend Jack Sweeney owned a boatyard, and that boat that's in the picture right there, that boat is named Misanthrope. Anyway, Jack said, if you can build the boat, we'll build it. I'll let you use the boatyard, the shed in the boatyard. So that's how you start building a boat. Back in the old days, before computers, you took the plans that the designer had, which were like house plans, pretty good size, and he had a whole bunch of numbers and drawings on it, and you transposed all of that onto life size. So we laid out that floor. It was level, perfectly level, painted it white, and then ended up drawing the boat on that white floor and transposing it into the ribs that we needed to build the boat. And there is the hull upside down. We built the scaffolding to go over it. There were sometimes there were as many as 8 people, but normally about 6 of us built the whole boat. And it was not quick. It's dirty, nasty, crummy work. You spend a day cutting the fiberglass, Then you spend a day rolling it out, noxious chemicals. You couldn't have done it now, but back then we were just using paint rollers, and that's my mother, the size reference. And then you spend a day grinding the fiberglass smooth enough to put another layer on, and then you go over it all over it again. But if you persist, wrong way, you end up with a hull. This had just been turned over. In the foreground, you see the square set of wood. There are rollers on all four corners that you put underneath the boat when it's upside down, and straps. And then you slowly and carefully turn it over and then put it back on the ground and put it back in the building. And that was maybe 5 months into the building project. There it is, shoved back in the building, and now we're building the strong back to build the deck in front of it. So 3 people were working on building the deck, and 3 of us were inside working on putting an interior in the boat. That's what 56 foot looks like empty. All of that plywood, that's paneling, which was used to form the fiberglass, all of that gets pulled out, and it's just smooth fiberglass on the inside. And you put the bulkheads in. You can see the engine hanging there. It was a little Volkswagen diesel. 45 years ago, most boats had a Perkins 4108 diesel engine, and it weighed about 900 pounds. And the Volkswagen, which was in cars from the 70s on for years, weighed 400 and something pounds. So I was saving some weight. Weight is the difference in making a boat fast, as they've really found out since then. My boat ended up weighing about 30,000 pounds, which was half of what another boat of the same size would have normally weighed. That's the stringers before it's planked for the deck. Same procedure. There's the deck kind of finished. We closed off for the winter. It was cold. We're in Rhode Island for the winter, so, it was a lot of fun. You pull the boat back out on the rollers and put the deck on, and this is kind of a fitting process. It gets lowered down, and you see if it's going to clear all the bulkheads that you've got carefully cut, but whether it's going to work, and if it doesn't, you trim the bulkheads off and lower it back down again until everything works. And then it was basically put down in epoxy, and we fiberglassed it later. There she is. We just put the keel on. Once you put the keel on, you can't put it back in the building. That's the lead down at the bottom. The different color goes from blue to basically dark. That's all lead, and that makes the boat too tall to go back in the building. So from then on, it had to stay out. And now I've got to stop everything and sail across the Atlantic, because part of the deal with Jack for me to use the boatyard is that I would sail his boat Misanthrope over to England so we could do the double-handed transatlantic race together. So the poor boat, big boat, sits for 4 months, 3 months, while I take Misanthrope across the Atlantic. We prepare and I sail it back with Jack in the double-handed transatlantic race. This is all back and forth a lot. Launch day turned out pretty nice. For a backyard project, Bruce Livingston Jr. was the guy that was in charge of this whole thing. I was there every day. I mixed every bucket of resin that went in the boat, because if somebody screwed it up, I wanted it to be me. But she turned out, and if you're familiar with sailboats, you look at how much white there is. There's not a lot of boat in the water. There's a lot of keel to keep it going straight, but there's not a lot of boat in the water. This is pretty light. And amazingly, and you never know until you put it in the water, it actually floated on its lines where it should have. In other words, there was just the same amount of white showing all the way around. We'd gotten it right. Because the white line was not kind of arbitrary. It was in the plans and marked as we built the boat. Every station had that marking on it, so we knew where we were. And they decided we're going to run a race around the world. Now, during the time we were building, the BOC group in England, which had been British Oxygen, had heard, because one of the British guys that entered the race had contacted them for sponsorship in the race. And they came to us and said, we'd like to sponsor the race. What do you want for it? They wanted to buy the race. Hey, take it, it's yours. And they ran with it. And all of a sudden, there's money. And all of a sudden, all the people that didn't want anything to do with it are there in line with their hands out. BOC did a good job. They had just changed their name from British Oxygen to BOC Group because they were worldwide. They changed our stop points in the race. When we'd originally set it up, for financial reasons, we were going to Cape Town, and then we were going to go to Sydney, we were going to go to Hobart, which is on the bottom of Tasmania. And then we were going to go to Punta del Este, Uruguay, because they would help us without a whole lot of money, and back to Newport. Well, BOC Group wanted sponsorship benefit out of this. Now, they have AFROX in South Africa, so that was covered. They had BRASROX in Brazil, so we went to Rio instead of Punta del Este. And they had consolidated industrial gases in Australia. Hobart was not the big point. They wanted us to go to Sydney. So we changed the race, they changed the race rules to Sydney, and that was it. Everybody that entered the race that started in 1982 had entered the race before it was officially sponsored. These are people that just wanted to go do this silly race and be the first ones to do it. This magazine flyer was put out by Cruising World magazine before the start of the race. And it was the fold-out that was in the magazine that came out the month of the start. These are the people that started the single-handed race around the world in 1982. The little Japanese guy right in the middle, that's Yuko Tada, who had raced to Japan in 1975 with me and had been a good friend. He did the first race, the second race, and was in the third race. Not everybody finished, but most of them did. And that's a picture of my boat, Gladiator. That name was picked at the last moment, seemed appropriate. Mind you, this is 20 years before the movie, so. And CA is Crédit Agricole. That's Philippe Chanteau. He eventually won the race. And I had to drop out, which is kind of a bummer, having put this whole thing together. The self-steering on a sailboat is basically, you can see it on the back. There's supposed to be a pointer here. There it is right there. On both of our boats, it's the same unit. It's a servo pendulum. The little wind vane up on top turns the servo, which runs it counter to the water flow and pulls the wheel or the tiller one way or the other. These work fine on cruising boats. I had one on Catafa. People have sailed around the world with these things beautifully. The trouble is when you start going fast, the apparent wind that's running that little wind vane has changed drastically. If you're going downwind, the wind's behind you, you start going from 7 or 8 knots to 15 or 16 knots. The apparent wind starts to move forward. Just like if you stick your hand out the window of the car and you're going 10 miles an hour, you can feel it. If you're going 20 miles an hour, that's your apparent wind. So when you're going too fast, the apparent wind shifts, the wind vane thinks that you need to be going a different direction, corrects, and the boat turns sideways to the waves, which is not good. Mine didn't do that. Mine just broke off the back. I was going too damn fast. They weren't used to this kind of speed. And my boat, when it was surfing, and any of you who've ever surfed or even body surfed and caught a wave, the front half of the boat actually sticks out of the water and the boat just picks up speed. I would be going sometimes 25 miles an hour. And that broke the paddle off the back, which was tied onto the boat, and it broke the limb of the self-steering that it was tied onto, and that was the end of my race. That was on the way from Cape Town to Sydney. I went back to Cape Town with my tail between my legs, cried a lot. That's not a lot of fun, having put all the time into this. So, time goes on. That's the boat out of the water in Cape Town. You can see the self-steering there. That's the trim tab. That's the rope that it was tied onto, and that's the leg of the self-steering that the whole thing went off the back. So I sailed back to Newport and did some work on the boat, sailed to Florida, did some deliveries, raced to Bermuda. There's a picture of the boat. One of the things about having a big boat in races is you get some spectacular photographs. If you got your own boat, you can't do this, but when you got professional photographers out catching boats at starts, you get pictures like that and aerial shots like that. We're on our way to Bermuda, crude race. I decided to do the round alone again in 1986. And, whoops, I'm going the wrong way, excuse me. There I was at the dock getting ready to go for the second race. Pretty much ready. The name had been changed. A friend of mine had said, oh, I'll give you some money, sponsorship. He had a brokerage house, Legend Securities, so we renamed the boat Legend Securities and took off in the second round the world race. And this time, nothing went wrong. Nothing went wrong. Well, not quite. One of the guys in the race, who has also been in the first race in a small boat, he got some sponsorship and built a big boat and then lost his mast in the first leg. I sailed past him. I took that picture. I sailed past him to give him a spinnaker pole that he could use to help the jury rig. He ended up sailing it back to somewhere in Brazil. Made it to Sydney, still small-boned. The guy in the middle is the Prime Minister of Australia, Bob Hawke. No Secret Service, no nuts. The guy on the other side is Robin Knox Johnson, who was the first man to sail around the world nonstop. BOC had hired him. This is the guy that said, I don't want to have anything to do with running a race around the world. They'd hired him and paid him a lot of money to run the first two races. Anyway, the second race, I raced from, of course, Sydney, pulled into Rio, flew home. My father had been sick, and I was trying to get home to see him. And Rio's not a place I wanted to stay anyway. They were having some real problems. As long as you stayed in the yacht club, you were fine, but they had guys with machine guns outside, and just, let's go. So I flew home, came back, started the last leg, which once you get around Cape Horn, you've pretty much done it. And there I was crossing the finish line. Somebody said it looked like I'd been out for a day sail. I didn't have any real problems to speak of, routine stuff in 28,000 miles. Across Newport, they gave me a participation trophy. Friend of friend of mine, I think it was Jack Sweeney, the guy that owned the boatyard, we had joked when we were building the boat because everybody really thought this was nuts to sail around the world by yourself. So we said, okay, my initials are DW anyway, we'll just call it Death Wish. Now I knew that I couldn't name the boat Death Wish because I'd written the rules. Actually, I copied the rules from all the rest of the races that had been run. And the size limits were the same size as the O-Star limits. So, but anyway, they printed up the visors for me with Death Wish on them. I wish I still had one, but I don't. And that's it. Thank you. Any questions? I guess I covered it all. Thank you. Oh, all right. They're going to bring you a mic.
Hold it close.
I'm just curious how old you were when you quit your job and decided to do this.
I was 30,
Okay.
and everybody wants to know how I could do it, and this will irritate a lot of people, but I wasn't married. The job I had, I was in field sales, and I was basically covering the west coast of the United States, at least from California, Colorado. I was on the road 200 days, at least a year. I was living on the company's money and banking what they were paying me, and that's a pretty good racket. Nobody was home to spend, so I didn't get married, and I really didn't have time to. I was traveling too much. So being single made it possible to just throw everything away because I wasn't responsible for anybody but myself, which is just what single handling is all about.
Right here.
Somebody else.
What did you do to prepare yourself the very first time you went out? And or do you still do any sailing today?
I'm too old. Things are too creaky. Sailing, if you're sailing like I was sailing, especially a big boat, is pretty hard on the body. My wrists are both shot from pulling on, raising and lowering sails, pulling on halyards. My knees are pretty chewed up from crawling around on the foredeck, fighting with sails. It's not easy. It's physically demanding. And hell, I'm 81, so you just can't, my balance isn't as good. It's just not going to work.
To prepare yourself the first time?
Just went. I figured, well, Dennis and I had sailed across to the Marquesas, so when I was sailing back, I just didn't let anybody know because I didn't want anybody to be worried. I would either get there or I wouldn't. And I got there. So it was, I read a lot of books. The sailing back from Tahiti was pretty boring because you're sailing on the wind and you set the sails and the trade winds. It's pretty much the same for a week at a time. So I just curled up, and for some reason I had Will and Ariel Durant's Story of Civilization on board. I think I read the first 7 volumes. So another one.
Did you go through the Bermuda Triangle? Second question would be, what was your favorite race and why?
I'm sorry, I didn't get half of that. Favorite race?
So did you go through the Bermuda Triangle when
yeah.
you did that race? What was your favorite race and why?
Well, the single-handed round the world race that I finished, the second one, that's got to be the favorite because I'd organized it and I'd done it. And I built the boat for it. So it's a real accomplishment to have done all that and get it and finish it. The rest of them were just, I enjoyed it all. I like sailing. I kept it up after the race, but 5-6 years ago, I was helping a friend of mine take a 70-footer down to the islands, and the mast came down, and that's not a lot of fun. And of course, it always happens at night. Everything that's going to go bad always goes wrong at night. And when you lose a mast that's 70 foot in the air and all of a sudden it's down in the water next to you trying to punch a hole in the boat, none of that was any fun. So when we didn't lose a drop of blood, but that was it. I flew home and haven't been out since. kind of, maybe this is God's way of telling me it's time to stop. Yeah.
Getting down to the nitty gritty, you have to eat and drink. I saw the cans of food and I understand the canned food, but what about fresh water?
You don't use a lot. You're out in the ocean, well, back then it used to be cleaner. It's still pretty clean. So you do all your washing. Joy dishwashing detergent back in the day was what you could use to wash bodies, and it would wash off. It would suds up and actually wash. For some reason, a lot of the bar of soap doesn't do you a bit of good, but Joy does. You throw a bucket over the side, throw it over your head, soap up, rinse off. If you had any fresh water, you'd kind of rinse off some of the tender spots, we'll put it that way, with fresh water and get it out of your hair. Every time it rained, you took advantage of it. And you'd also gather rainwater. The big boat had 40 gallons of fresh water, 2 20-gallon tanks. You carry apples, they stay good for a long time. Onions, eggs keep remarkably well. People who aren't used to refrigeration have found this out a long time ago. Eggs will keep really well, especially if you get them straight out of the egg, out of the chicken, and don't wash them, because they come out with a kind of a coating on them that protects them. So sailors who've gotten washed eggs will put Vaseline on them to seal them up. It doesn't take a lot of food for one person for a couple of months. It really doesn't. When you settle down to it, you've got cereals, you've got stuff like the Betty Crocker scalloped potatoes. You just add water to and throw in a can of Spam, something like that, cook it. You stay alive well. Small boned, but alive.
Just from a human interest standpoint, Dave, you started out with a cat. What happened to the cat? And second of all, how did you feed the cat?
Well,
That's a lot of food, and then the cat has to, well, never mind.
okay, well, the cat had cat litter, because 2 days before the start of that race, I was running around getting cat food and flea powder. Fleas are fun. And cat food. When I got to Japan, of course, they weren't worried about any quarantine on the cat because they knew exactly where the cat had been for 2 months. But I couldn't bring it back in the States, and I wouldn't have been able to anyway. But there was a monk there, a Buddhist monk, who was in one of the pictures. And he and his wife took the cat. And normally, the cats there are not pets. They're mousers, and they turned them loose, and they just kept the mouse population down. They turned this one into the most pampered thing you've ever seen. The monk came to the start of the second round of the world race in all his robes and everything, brought me some pictures of the cat, who was so fat that lying on his side, the paws couldn't go down. It was just, the cat was just fine and lived a good life. Yes, sir.
Yes, you must have, sorry. At some point you must have run into some rough weather.
Oh, yeah.
What was your strategy? Did you have a sea anchor? Did you heave to, or?
I think that sea anchor stuff came from old slow boats. We have found, and there have been a lot of changes in sailing since we proved to them that a good boat is better than a boat that was designed for rules. Back in those days, the racing boats were all designed to what was called the International Offshore Rule, which was some stupid thing that they'd come up with to try and handicap boats, and it didn't turn a good boat out. So we were the first people to come up with open, anything you wanted, design it any way you want it, and all of a sudden people realized, hell, these boats are faster with one person on it than we can get the same size boat with a full crew. And it changed yacht design altogether. Had plenty of bad weather, but all that sea drogues and leaving oil behind you and all that stuff is all for slow. Faster is better and safer. Now these guys can go around the world by themselves in 70 days. Took me 167. That's with 3 stops. They're going nonstop in 70 days. But these boats are driven by autopilots that are aircraft quality with gyros and all kinds of fancy stuff. They don't steer the boats, and they've got fancy handling gear. It's like Formula One racing. It has turned into big dollars. They've got hydrofoils on these things that lift the whole boat out of the water in the Southern Ocean in 40, 50 knots of wind. It's just, if you want to see some funny stuff, go on YouTube and look up Vendée, Vendee. It's French, Vendée Globe. They run a nonstop race around the world, which after we'd run 2 stop races, they took over. The race that I started ran until 2008. Every 4 years, pretty good spread. But now it's just the high dollar race guys, and they've gone, there's another race that they've started that's gone back to basics. Smaller boats, have to use a sextant, no GPS, you know, back to primitive. To each his own. I don't want to do it anymore. It's kind of been there, done that. Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you so much. But before you go away, if any of you have had such an interesting, life-altering experience, come tell me about it, because we all want to hear about it. Thank you.